Hello, and welcome to a recording of a presentation on breaking the cycle, burnout, and boundaries in motherhood. I'm Katie Turner. I'm a registered psychologist in Calgary, Alberta, and I'm excited to dive into this topic with you. So, before we start, I just want to acknowledge, in the spirit of reconciliation, that I live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina and the Nakota Nations and the Métis government, and all the people who make their home in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. So just sending acknowledgement to the traditional keepers of the land wherever you are from. A little bit about me for those who don't know me. I'm a registered psychologist in Alberta. I'm based out of Calgary, but I see clients virtually in Alberta and in any province that also allows for telehealth between provinces. So currently that is Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Quebec. But that changes from year to year as well. Some of my areas of specialty are working with cycle breaking women, working with deeper patterns, nervous system healing, so past trauma, old subconscious or unconscious beliefs, to really help people heal the past and live the best life in the present and future. Another area of specialty for me is spiritual awakenings and connection with intuition. So I work with individuals in relationships in my therapy practice, and I also offer workshops, groups, and women's groups, circles, and events. So those are either online and open to anyone or in person, usually in Alberta or Calgary. So a bit about what we'll go over today. I'm going to talk a bit about what burnout is and some of the causes and contributors of burnout. And in context for this presentation, we're really going to focus it on cycle breaking and for women and mothers. So we won't get into every single contributor, but I will touch on the main points. So if you want to go deeper, I'll send some resources for you to do that as well. Or I do have a longer course that's more 5 or 6 weeks. So, just a disclaimer, this is more for my own insurance and practice policies, is that this is a psychoeducational workshop. So, it is not a substitute for your own personal mental health guidance by a qualified health professional. So, please use your own best judgment and seek any personal support for your own assessment and treatment needs. So, starting off, what is burnout? So, burnout is really a state of emotional, mental, and often physical exhaustion that's really starts after a period of prolonged or repeated stress. So, it's often caused by workplace stress, and the literature first started to recognize burnout in workplace stress, mainly in healthcare and helping professions. But we now know a lot more about burnout, and it can really be due to stresses in many areas of life. So, this may be caregiving, relationship stressors, and it can be a pileup of stressors in multiple areas. One thing I'm passionate about in terms of burnout is there is a lot more psychoeducation out there. Many people are aware of anxiety symptoms, depression symptoms, and so sometimes burnout gets missed. And there can be a danger if burnout gets missed because of the piece that burnout doesn't come out of nowhere. It is a prolonged period of stress. Similarly, if you are like driving your car ongoing and you're barely putting in gas and you're not filling up enough gas as what you're using, like that car is going to run out of gas on the side of the road. Burnout, we can often push through, and I'll talk more about personality factors and people who are kind of more overfunctioners or have that ability to push through. Burnout is a real risk factor for us. And so there are seasons of life where we may need to push through, but we need that recovery time after and that like rest time and to do things, work different parts of our brain to recover from burnout. And burnout can actually be quite serious. So I'll get into some of the symptoms. Burnout can end up resulting in a diagnosis of depression or anxiety or something else. And so you can have layers with it. But burnout is actually not in the DSM. So it's not recognized as a diagnosis in itself. And so it can get missed and people can misunderstand it. The World Health Organization does have a category for burnout, but in the DSM, we don't at this time. Again, that's a document, like a manual that is updated every so often, so that could change in the future. And so with burnout, it progresses in three phases. And with all of these phases, in the early phases of burnout, we might have a few mild or moderate ones once in a while. But as burnout symptoms progress, I'll often use the metaphor of like it is like a slippery, muddy slope that you're slowly kind of sinking deeper and deeper into. And it is similar of, I don't know if this metaphor is true or not. It's kind of a grisly metaphor, but there's that saying of like if you put a frog in boiling water, it'll jump out right away. And if you slowly boil it, it'll sit there and boil to death. I have no idea if that's true. I hope no one's actually tested that, but burnout is often like that. It's often this piece of like over time, we're slowly like the temperature's increasing, and our symptoms are creeping up. So it can get really bad, and we may not realize how bad it is because we didn't go from doing well, having enough energy, being rested to suddenly being in the more severe. Like it is that slow degrees over time, and recovery is often slow degrees over time, and sometimes more so than others. So I'll talk more about that later on. But in the first phase, we have things like physical and emotional exhaustion. So these are things like chronic fatigue, insomnia, forgetfulness and impaired concentration and attention. It can be physical symptoms. As as our body starts to get overwhelmed, our immune system can get compromised, so we can have more increased illness, take longer to recover, be catching things more often. We can have a change in appetite, which is really, it's similar to depression symptoms where it's by person. Some people may eat a lot more and may be eating more out of stress, and others lose their appetite and are not eating enough. We can have increase of anxiety, depression, and anger. And again, that starts lower, more mild or moderate once in a while. So it could be like trouble sleeping a few times a night. But then as it progresses and gets more moderate or severe, then it can be a nightly thing or every day waking up way before your alarm, feeling exhausted, but your mind's racing and having a hard time falling asleep, staying asleep, and getting enough sleep in the night. And so that also like feeds into it because sleep is such a foundational need for all of us. Then we start going into cynicism and detachment. So oftentimes when people are experiencing burnout, they may think they're starting to get depressed, and it can lead into depression as well. You may end up needing to treat the burnout and depression on top of it. But burnout, cynicism, and detachment is often a loss of enjoyment, pessimism, isolation, detachment. It can feel like you're just going through the emotions, but you kind of feel like a robot and you're not really present, not able to get joy. And burnout really can start in any one area, but then it starts to kind of spider out to everything. So at first it might just be at work, and then it might start to affect you more at home and with friendships and like with your children. So one of the things that's important about recognizing if burnout is playing a role is oftentimes people see these cynicism, detachment signs and think like, oh, I think I'm getting depressed. And with depression, one of the treatments for depression and an important part of depression recovery is like sometimes we have to do things we don't feel like doing and push ourselves, and then we feel better later. The risk there is that if it's burnout related and burnout is playing a role in depression symptoms, like if we are just pushing through and we're actually not getting the rest and recovery time and not treating the burnout itself, we can make everything worse. So that's why I'm very kind of passionate about more information about burnout in general, because burnout rates are so high and so prevalent as well. And they've gotten higher since the pandemic as well. As we get into more of that signs of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment, as burnout symptoms get more moderate or severe, we get more feelings of apathy, hopelessness. Like burnout can get quite dangerous. I've seen people have almost like a mental health breakdown or crisis. It can get to the point of like safety concerns for themselves, of like, are they even not feeling like staying alive? That's at the very severe end. And again, that's often overlapping with depression or something else going on too. Increased irritability, lack of productivity, and poor performance. So that's part of the like, once burnout starts going and going down that slope, like we actually do lose temporarily. It's not permanent. I mean, I'd always screen that with an appropriate medical professional, but we do start to lose productivity, and we make more mistakes. We can't focus, we can't concentrate. Like it takes us longer to do something. We're not as effective. So we're often falling behind, our workload's piling up, like the to-do list is piling up, and then it's taking us longer to do it. We're making more mistakes. And so it's this like vicious cycle that often keeps feeding into each other and like sinking deeper into the mud. And so there is research that has shown burnout rates are rising overall. I did a bit more research to prepare for some recent presentations because I had done some burnout. I'd done a lot of work in burnout prior to the pandemic, and in my own practice, I just since the pandemic started and ever since then, I've seen the rates of burnout and work-related leave that are related to burnout or where burnout's playing a significant role. I've just never seen it as high in my own personal therapy practice as I have in I mean, I've been full time in it almost 15 years and in the field for about 20. So I wasn't sure if it was just something I happened to be seeing and was going on for the clients I work with, or if it was going on overall. But when I looked deeper into the research, it did confirm that it is up overall. So prior to the pandemic, about half of workers would report experiencing burnout at some point in their life, like so at some point in their working career. But since the pandemic and post-pandemic, some 2023 surveys like indicate that there is worsening burnout rates for Canadian workers, and this is likely in many areas of the world. So at the time of the survey, 42% reported feeling burnt out. So that was not half at some point in their life. That was like 42% right now while they're being surveyed. And so there was some interesting statistics of age rates wise, like millennials, kind of that late millennial was 27 to 42, report more burnout rates than any other generation, whereas Gen X was about 51%, millennials about 55, baby boomers were lower around like 24%. Um, and it kind of makes sense because in that age range, we often have like we're establishing careers, we're often working, or if we're partnered, if we have children, we might be caretaking children, we might have parents who are aging. So many people are in a sandwich generation. Like there's just a lot of pressures and a lot of things going on at that phase of life as well. Many people reported that heavy workloads and understaffed teams where lack of communication, managerial support, and missing tools to function at work were part of the issue. I won't get into workplace today, but again, there's many mothers who are also working, and so like the workplace can pile on. There isn't as much research outside of workplace, but I think there's things we can take and make probably safe assumptions that like this likely could apply to any role where we're not having enough time to do everything and a pile up of different roles where we're always feeling like we're trying to catch up, don't have enough time and don't have enough support. And so in 2024, Statistics Canada also found that 21.2% of workers report high or very high levels of workplace stress. And so in terms of contributors to burnout, there are kind of like three different layers of that can make us more prone to burnout. And so the more that we have of those, the more we are stacked to be vulnerable to burnout. And there's kind of good news and bad news in that. I won't go into each one of these for the purpose of this presentation because we do not have enough time and it's not all relevant for mothers. But just knowing that there's personal factors, so I'll touch on those briefly. There's kind of the workplace or situational, like the roles we're playing, the things outside of ourselves. And then there's the larger social or cultural or systemic issues that can make us more prone to burnout. The good news is that with more of the personal ones, we can work with those a lot more. And sometimes we can adjust things around the workplace situational too and see like what can we control, where can we take steps to reduce our risk and have things be more sustainable. In terms of personal contributors, things like if we are more prone to overfunction, and I'll explain more about what that means, if we're more perfectionistic, and if we have an indirect communication style, so we don't kind of look at personality types who kind of just get their heads down in the weeds when a lot's going on and try to work their way out of it to be like, hey, it's really busy, but like, what do I got to do? How do I get all this done? And they keep doing that without and have really high expectations for themselves, and don't really. have to develop more of that ability to zoom out and take an eagle eye view and see what is actually everything on my plate. Like, is this sustainable for any person at all? Like, is this too much? Does something need to shift or give? Do I need to have some actually direct and hard conversations about that? And I'll get into sort of communications skills later because it's not about being aggressive or it can be uncomfortable because we're not used to doing it and it's often not modeled well, but it's really important in terms of like our personal boundaries and knowing our own capacity. Nobody else can do that for us. So it is something that we need to get better at. And I do just want to acknowledge, like on the personal contributors, I've been through multiple cycles of burnout in my own life. I went through it more often early in the field as well because of now I know I have a lot of these personal factors, which they're a double-edged sword. Like there's some things that are really great about them. But there are some things that we need to manage and need to be aware of. So I'll talk more about that in the overfunctioning. But the good news is like when we're aware of the things within ourselves, we can better manage them. We can actually change things a lot more. So we're not like doomed to be in these cycles. Some of the workplace contributors, again, I won't get into all of them, but I did want to list them just so it's not I don't want to oversimplify it and be like, it's just these two things. It's like there's lots of different things. But in terms of the motherhood role, some of the things that stand out for me around workplace contributors, or those like role contributors. So we can have, if we have workplace stress and we're burnt out at work, like we're going to need to address that so that that workplace stress isn't spilling over into other areas. But sometimes it may not be just one area. It may just be like everything overall. Like there's too much with work and parenting and whatever else is going on. If we have an unrealistic load on us of like the to-do list is always longer than we can keep up with, whether that's work or any other role. In the workplace literature, people who felt like they had enough time to actually like get their job done and finish their tasks, they're if workers don't have that, they're at about a 70% higher risk of moderate to severe burnout. So that's a very high percentage statistically. So again, just if we have enough time, we can kind of keep up with things. And we're not as at high risk of burnout. Lack of support is another one, which I'll get into more of why statistically, like there still is a gender gap. That's not about, it's not saying all men, all women, all relationships, but just when we look at the stats overall, we do see some patterns that are still emerging. And really like lack of work-life balance. So again, burnout isn't so much like what we're doing, but it's that like how much output, how much stress is there, how many things are we working on, and when are we actually able to recharge? When can we do something different? Like when are we getting enough rest and recovery? Because we can push ourselves through to a certain point. That might be months. It might be sometimes it's decades. Like many women I work with, they've pushed through for a long time, but then we can kind of hit a wall, whether it's in motherhood or you get like the fun combination of motherhood, perimenopause, menopause. You reach a certain age where you're like your body and hormones are not allowing you to actually like you can't just push through. We can override the body to a certain extent, and then at some point our either our mental health or our physical health will start shutting us down and we cannot override it anymore. And I'm a big fan of like earlier intervention or prevention because if things get really bad, it can be a lot harder of a recovery process. And I don't know if there's actually research around this. I think there'd be very mixed opinions in the field, but I mean, I have worked with clients where had physical health concerns or ongoing health concerns, and they link it back to saying, I think like this period of stress really set this off. It's hard to say for that for sure because it's really different for everyone, but we do know for many conditions, there's kind of a genetic set point, and then something in the environment seems to set it off. So that could be true for some people, and for others, it may be more genetic. It may have happened anyway. It's not about blaming anyone in any way if something is going on. But again, just like our health is important, and sometimes it can feel like there's so many fires going on around us, but we need to be sustainable long term too. So some of the social contributors are things like it's really the levels of what levels of systemic oppression and privilege do we hold? And so that's really not, when we get into anti-oppression work, it's not saying like someone's a bad person or this doesn't exist. It's that we really do live in this culture where we have this legacy of like colonialism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and all of us at some level hold some level of internalized belief system with that. And so it's not saying it's not that we're a bad person, but if we completely ignore it and say like, oh, that doesn't happen, or I don't believe those things, it's like then we're more at risk of unintentional harm. So it's really looking at what are the role of historical or cultural factors that privilege some groups over others. So it's really just the absence of additional barriers based on group membership. And those can be things like gender, race or ethnicity, sexual orientation, body size, disability, neurodiversity. Um, and those are tough areas to look at. But when we see that the rigged game isn't a neutral experience, you'll probably feel some feelings about it as you go through the world, spotting the ways the game is rigged and the ways the world is lying to you about the ways the game is rigged. This is from Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. It's a really excellent resource for women around burnout and ways to dive into deeper to some of these contributors, and ways of prevention and recovery as well. But it's just saying the more we have, the more areas we fall into, um, the more prone we are to burnout. And so, again, sometimes we can't fully change those, but I found it can be really helpful to work with some of our own internalized messages around that. And I'll get more into that further on, but basically, a brief intro of what I mean around that is sometimes we might want to set boundaries and be like, I deserve time too. I don't believe mothers should carry all of this. But then we have our own internalized guilt around it, or we can just avoid taking the time, and feel like we need to be there and do everything and get into these cycles where like we're playing a role in it too. So when we can do that, look at where that's showing up for us and do some of that like deconditioning work, it's like it can help us break free and actually like do things a little bit differently, even though when it is this like multi-generational piece, it's often very uncomfortable when we start doing that. And I'll talk about that in when I talk about cycle breaking as well.